seem to rise along with K characteristics. Blacks' higher rate of mental instability and so forth is not a function of poverty or wealth. Blacks suffer from mental disorders, drug addiction, and alcoholism at higher rates than whites in all social classes. Asians, despite their introversion and anxiety, have the fewest mental problems. Professor Rushton points out that RK theory can account for differences between individuals of the same race. That is to say, people of the same race tend to vary according to the same pattern that distinguishes the races. In both Europe and Africa, the following traits tend to go together: large families, short lifespan, criminality, high levels of sexuality, loose family ties, frequency of twinning. Mothers of fraternal twins are more likely than other mothers to have had early first periods, larger families, lower birth weight children, even when they are singletons, more infant mortality, to have been promiscuous, and to have shorter lives. Professor Rushton has found that in all societies fraternal twins are more likely to be born into the lower than the upper classes. A Swedish study determined that girls who have early first periods are more likely to cheat, be truant, and try marijuana than girls who have late first periods. In the United States, early maturation is correlated with promiscuity, illegitimate births, leaving school, crime, and other social problems. Early sexual maturity seems to be heritable, with daughters resembling their mothers. If altruism is an important K trait, crime would be an extreme R trait. Across broad populations, crime is associated with behavior that almost perfectly describes how blacks differ from whites and whites differ from Asians. Large families, illegitimacy, low intelligence, early sexual maturity, promiscuity, weak family ties, little investment in children, and a short life. Professor Rushton suggests that the entire complex of RK trait differences is therefore largely under genetic control, and that it characterizes different social classes, just as it does races. There is little question that the most physiological RK traits are heavily influenced by heredity. Professor Rushton makes the additional point that physiology is closely correlated with many other forms of behavior previously thought to be independent of heredity, but now found to be greatly influenced by it. The result is a strong case for believing that the patterns of behavior that distinguish races as well as individuals are largely inherent, reflect a consistent RK pattern, and are impervious to social programs. And it's true, when we look at social programs, social interventions that are supposed to narrow the racial gaps, they often tend to fail. For example, IQ, the Abecedarian Project, or the No Child Left Behind. No social intervention, no program have long-lasting successful results. For as long as official statistics have been kept, blacks in white societies have been overrepresented in all indices of social pathology: crime, illegitimacy, poverty, school failure, and long-term unemployment. Low IQ can lead to crime because less intelligent children do poorly at school and fail to learn the skills needed to get well-paid jobs, or even any job. Unemployment is therefore 2 to 3 times higher among blacks than whites. People without jobs need money and have relatively little to lose by robbery or burglary, and may therefore commit property crimes. The association between low intelligence and crime holds for whites as well, among whom the average IQ of criminals is about 84. Nevertheless, as Charles Murray and the late Richard Herrnstein showed in their book The Bell Curve, low IQ cannot entirely explain a black crime rate that is 6.5 times the white rate, sometimes 7.5 times the white rate. When blacks and whites are matched for IQ, blacks still commit crimes at a much higher rate than whites. This shows that blacks must have some other characteristics besides low intelligence that explain their high levels of criminality. Now, although this book doesn't mention this, a good explanation for this could be the MAOA gene, the warrior gene, which has a higher distribution among blacks than among whites. We also know that testosterone is highly correlated to impulsivity and aggression, and blacks have 15 to 19% higher levels of testosterone on average than whites, which may lead to a higher propensity for violence in the black community. This, in combination with IQ, where criminals usually have an IQ around 84, may be the major reason why blacks commit crime at such a high rate compared to other races. Professor Herrnstein and Dr. Murray found the same race and IQ relationship for social problems other than crime: unemployment, illegitimacy, poverty, and living on welfare. All of these are more frequent among blacks and are related to low IQ, and low IQ goes some way towards explaining them, but these social problems remain greater among blacks than among whites with the same IQs. Alright? Low intelligence is therefore not the whole explanation. Professor Herrnstein and Dr. Murray did not offer any suggestions as to what the additional factors responsible for the greater prevalence of these social problems among blacks might be. They concluded only that some ethnic differences are not washed away by controlling for either intelligence or for any other variables that we examined. We'll leave those remaining differences unexplained and look forward to learning from our ecologies where the explanations lie, close quotes. Bell curve, page 340. Now, Richard Lynn talks about psychopathic personality. I propose that the variable that explains these differences is that blacks are more psychopathic than whites. Just as racial groups differ in average IQ, they can also differ in average levels of other psychological traits, and racial differences in the tendency towards psychopathic personality would explain virtually all of the differences in the black and white behavior left unexplained by differences in IQ. Studies have found that the prevalence of conduct disorders is about twice as high among blacks as among whites. This is the case not only in the United States, but also in Britain and the Netherlands. Other racial groups also differ in the prevalence of conduct disorders among children. As with all the other expressions of psychopathic personality, conduct disorders are frequent among American Indians, for example. In 1994, the American Psychiatric Association issued a revised diagnostic manual listing 11 features of antisocial personality disorders. 1. Inability to sustain consistent work behavior. 2. Failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behavior. This is a euphemism for being a criminal. 3. Irritability and aggressivity as indicated by frequent physical fights and assaults. 4. Repeated failure to honor financial obligations. 5. Failure to plan ahead or impulsivity. 6. No regard for truth as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases or conning others. 7. Recklessness regarding one's own or others' personal safety as indicated by driving while intoxicated or recurrent speeding. 8. Inability to function as a responsible parent. 9. Failure to sustain a monogamous relationship for more than 1 year. 10. Lacking remorse. 11. The presence of conduct disorder in childhood. During the 65 or so years following its publication, the MMPI has been administered to a great many groups. Mean scores have been published by different investigators for a number of samples of blacks, whites, Asian Americans, Hispanics, and American Indians. All of these studies show a consistent pattern. Blacks and Indians have the highest psychopathic scores. Hispanics come next, followed by whites, and then ethnic Japanese and Chinese have the lowest scores. The same rank order of racial groups is found for all the expressions of psychopathic personality listed by the American Psychiatric Association, and these differences are found in both children and adults. Lack of honesty is one of the core features of the psychopathic personality, and one measure of this characteristic is the default rates on student loans. About half of American college students take out loans, but not all graduates repay them. The 1987 National Post-Secondary Student AIDS Study, consisting of 6,338 cases, reports default rates as follows: whites 5%, Hispanics 20%, American Indians 45%, and blacks 55%. 8%. Bad credit ratings also reflect a failure to honor financial obligations. A report by Freddie Mac of 12,000 households in 1999 found the highest percentage of poor credit ratings was amongst blacks, 48%, while whites had the lowest at 27%. A prominent feature of psychopathic personality is a high level of aggression, which is expressed in a number of ways including homicide, robbery, assault, and rape. All of these are crimes, so racial and ethnic differences appear in crime rates. High black crime rates have been documented by Jared Taylor and the late Glady Whitney in The Color of Crime. For homicide rates for black males are about 6 times the white rate, and it's arguably higher in some cases. And for black females, they are about 4 times higher. The high homicide rate of blacks is also found in South Africa, and homicide is generally higher in black countries than in white and East Asian countries. The rate for rape is about 5.5 times greater for blacks than whites, and in South Africa, it is reported that 1/4 of every South African black has raped once or more. That is to say, 25% have reported to have raped once or more. Domestic violence shows the same race differences. Severe violence by husbands against wives is about 4 times more common among blacks as whites. High crime rates among blacks have been found not only in the United States, but also in Britain, France, Canada, and Sweden. David Lykken, a leading expert on psychopathic personalities, writes of the psychopath's undeveloped ability to love or affiliate with others. And Robert Haar, another leading expert, writes that psychopaths view people as little more than objects to be used for their own gratification and equate love with sexual arousal. Marriage is the most explicit expression of long-term love, and a number of studies have shown that blacks attach less value to marriage than whites. Questionnaire surveys have found that blacks are less likely than whites to agree that, quote, marriage is for life, close quote. 2 American sociologists, R. Staples and L.B. Johnson, write that, quote, blacks do not rank marriages as highly as whites, close quote, and that, quote, black Americans' acceptance of this form of relationship is inconsistent with their African heritage, close quote. In a study of American sample of 2,059 married people, C.L. Broman found that, quote, blacks are significantly less likely to feel that their marriages are harmonious and are significantly less likely to be satisfied with their marriages, close quote. Other studies of racial and ethnic differences in attitudes have found that whites think about marriages more often than blacks and have a stronger desire than blacks to find the right marriage partner. There are also racial differences in rates of cohabitation, which also reflect a commitment to long-term relationship. A survey of 24 to 29-year-olds in Britain found that 68% of whites had cohabited, but only 38% of blacks. Blacks in the United States, Britain, France, and the Caribbean are less likely than whites to marry or enter into stable relationships. In an American survey of 18 to 64-year-olds carried out from 1990 to 1996, 61% of whites were married, but only 35% of blacks. The most likely to be married were East Asians, 66%. Low rates of stable relationships are found among blacks in the Caribbean islands. In a review of the literature, the sociologists B. Ram and G. E. Ebanks write that, quote, in the Caribbean in general, there is a substantial amount of movement from one sex partner to another, and also a very high percentage of reproduction outside marriage. In Detroit in 1982 to 1983, 63% of the population was black, but 90.5% of those who killed their spouses were black. Less extreme forms of aversion to monogamy are adultery and divorce. The Kinsey data on college graduates collected in the 1940s and 1950s found that 51% of blacks were unfaithful to their spouses during the first 2 years of marriage, compared with 23% of whites. Several other studies have confirmed that the incidence of marital infidelity is greater among blacks than among whites. Blacks cite